That's Enough Out of You, a weekly podcast where you'll hear the truth, or at least a closer version of the truth than most of the bullshit that's out there. Here are your hosts, Bill Rader and Sean Kane.
Hello and welcome to That's Enough Out of You. I'm your host, Bill Rader.
And I'm Sean Kane.
And we are coming at you with a very special podcast. This is a podcast that we didn't necessarily plan for, but we're excited to bring it to you. It's kind of a midweek podcast, something out of our normal schedule, but we felt that it was really, really important to get this out as quickly as possible. And we have a real special guest returning to the program that we think you guys will really enjoy. Sean, you want to talk a little bit about Lisa Pease and her return to That's Enough Out of You?
Yeah, so Lisa Pease, the author of Lie Too Big to Fail on the Robert Kennedy assassination. She's been on the show before, and she's just the best expert on the RFK assassination. And she's been doing a lot of work for Sirhan's parole. He's an innocent man that's been sitting in jail for something he did not do. He did not kill Robert Kennedy, and she's proven that in her book. And it's important to get the letters out because his last hearing, the parole board did recommend that he should be released, and then the governor vetoed it. So, it's just awful. And the thing is, we're gonna have the email that you could the email address that you could send to the state of California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation and send your letter out. And we're going to send you another address to copy Sirhan's lawyer in on it. So she has the copy of the letter that we send, and to recommend that this man get paroled.
And we'll put all of that information. It'll be right in the description on the YouTube video, and then also, the description of the podcast. So all of the links and email addresses, all that information will be there. But Sean, this was a long interview. It was well over an hour, so we want to try to get right into it. Anything else you want to add going into the interview?
No, I mean this is just one of our most important episodes, Bill. I mean this is really important to get this information out, and Lisa's the best. That's why we haven't talked about the RFK assassination at all on it, really, on our podcast that much at all, because we wanted to wait till Lisa could come on and talk about it, so this is important, buddy.
Really is. All right, without further ado, let's get into it. We'll play for you the Lisa Pease interview, returning to our podcast. Lisa Pease, welcome back to That's Enough Out of You.
My favorite podcast. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, appreciate the time.
No problem.
Absolutely. Yeah. So obviously this episode is a very special episode where we're going to put this out sort of on a different schedule and make sure that our listeners get a chance to hear it well before they, the deadline. And Sean, I don't know if you want to get into that, start talking about that, but the whole reason why we're doing this.
Yeah. The important thing, Bill, is, Sirhan is up for parole, and we want to get letters out, and we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to talk about Bobby Kennedy, because this is so important. And Lisa, do you want to say a couple of things about Sirhan before I go into the letters?
Yes. I mean, I spent 30 years looking into the history of both JFK and RFK's assassination, and it's so clear from my research that not only did Sirhan not kill Robert Kennedy, he wasn't even firing bullets. He was, clearly firing blanks, and that's a long discussion. We probably won't have time to prove that on the air, so I would encourage people to look at my book because it takes a long time getting to that point. But in my book, A Lie Too Big to Fail, I go into that. And as I wrote the book, I started feeling sorrier and sorrier for Sirhan because I realized the extent of how he was programmed and hypnotized to fire. And I know that sounds crazy to people who haven't researched what's possible under hypnosis. And Sean, I understand you've been hypnotized. So, you might want to talk about your own experience.
I will when we get into more on the assassination. I'm going to tell a story of when I was in Salem. I'm going to talk about that.
Okay, good.
But yeah, this is
But
important
he's an
because
innocent man, is
he
the
is an innocent
problem.
man,
And
Lisa. Yes.
he was framed and manipulated and tricked into participating in an assassination act without his knowledge. And again, it sounds incredible, but 30 years of research, I am 100% confident telling you that. And the people who've read my book understand. So I'm asking anybody who's listening, many of which have read my book, now's the time. Sirhan needs our help. He needs our letters. Sean's going to give you all the information, where to write. You can email. It doesn't have to go to the post office at this late date. So we'll give you that information.
And yeah, and Lisa, I read your book, and it's a tremendous book. I mean, I read it a couple of times. It's the best book on the Kennedy assassination. It really is, on the RFK assassination. And the thing is, the important thing here is that, Sirhan's last hearing with the parole board, they recommended that he be released. Yes. And it was the governor that vetoed it. And, on this show, we try to have the absence of politics. We try not to pick sides, Republican, Democrat, but, Gavin Newsom is going to get a hit from us on this, a Democrat from California. And what he did here was completely wrong. And I
completely
believe
political. He's going to run for president either at the next race or the one after. It's very clear that's his ambition. And he wants to stay on the right side of, what do I want to say, the media, basically, because to the media, this is an open and shut case. Sirhan was firing in the pantry. Everybody saw him pull a gun. Robert Kennedy fell down with a fatal wound. How could the truth be otherwise? And as we all know, and that's why you're here, the media won't tell you the rest of the story. So,
and the ironic thing is, Gavin Newsom describes himself as an Irish Catholic rebel, which, I mean, John and Bobby Kennedy were Irish Catholic rebels. So I find this.
Well, he says that Bobby Kennedy is his political idol. And I sent the governor at his home address a copy of my book. And in the inscription, I'm like, if you really love Bobby as much as you say, you should care who really killed him, because Sirhan did not. And I know he got the book because the initials were GN, Gavin Newsom.
And Lisa, he's one of only 2 governors in the country that have the power to do this, right?
Right. A parole board is hired for their expertise. They look over all the prisoners' records over time. They, do extensive psychological evaluations to determine if they're ready for release. So when any governor, and there used to be 4, now it's down to 2, and the ACLU is going after Newsom, and I think the other state is Maryland or one of those states back east. But it becomes political. The only reason to veto a parole is to make some sort of a political grandstanding to get a few more votes. And so it should go for that reason. The parole decision should not be political, and it really shouldn't matter in this country where we're supposed to all be equal. You shouldn't get a higher punishment just because you assassinated somebody beloved or famous. And again, I say that as somebody, Bobby Kennedy is my political idol, really. No one else had the political courage that he did. But I know from my studies of Bobby himself, he too would want justice for Sirhan. And Bobby Kennedy Jr. agrees, as does the other brother, Donald, who spoke to the parole board last time. And both of the brothers said, our father would have wanted him freed. It's the humane, Catholic thing to do. And it's what their father would have wanted. The women in the case, I know for a fact, none of the Kennedy women have ever looked in any depth at all into the details of the assassination. I know that one of the members of the family quoted a book that was published in, I think it was 1969. I'm like, the files weren't even released until 1988. No one could have known in 1969 what happened. And so if that's what you're going by, you're still missing the story.
And another person that's going to take a hit, Lisa, because again, we don't pull punches on this show and we don't take sides, is the Vice President, Kamala Harris.
Right, because she was the Attorney General when Sirhan's writ of appeal reached her desk. And Mel Aiton, a supposedly British researcher who kind of reeks of CIA intel, to be honest, and he's written an Oswald did a book on the JFK case, and a James O'Reilly book, did it on the MLK case, and a Sirhan did it on the RFK case. In fact, his RFK book is just terrible. It's called The Forgotten Terrorist. And he says that Sirhan was the first Palestinian terrorist Sirhan was not a Palestinian terrorist. He wanted to go to the UN and promote peace in the Middle East. That was his dream. This is just so over the top disinformation, just crazy stuff. And his book has a number of errors too, but that's the guy who gets to write Kamala response to the writ. And honestly, it was one of the most juvenile, kindergarten-y things I'd ever read in a legal document. It's full of kind of those crazy conspiracists, and it was all put downs and innuendo. And I'm like, where's the factual debunking? It wasn't there. It was shocking. And Kamala signed her name to that. So I attribute that to her, what do I want to say, her maturity level, or as I think is more the case, her allegiance to the powers that were capable of killing Bobby Kennedy and covering it up all these years.
Okay, so I mean, let's get out the information so people could, because it's important that people write an email and get these letters out. The first thing is, I have the link up on my social media accounts, but I'm going to read it here and we'll put it up again. But if you go to realhistoryarchives.blogspot.com, there's a petition there that you could sign. And what are we up to now, Lisa, on the signatures?
Well, there's a link to the petition. It's actually on the change.org site, and it's over 2,100 signatures. I haven't looked in the last, month or so. But if we hit 2,500 signatures, the media starts to pay attention, according to change.org, when petitions hit about 2,500. So everything helps. We're close to a tipping point here, and your listeners can really help. And again, it isn't just about Sirhan or Bobby. It's about reclaiming a whole chunk of our history from the 60s that has been mistold. And if it's true, as the Bible says, that the truth will set you free, then what do the lies do? They keep us imprisoned in this false reality. And I think until we're all on the same page in this country about what's really going on, we can't fix any of the problems we have today. That's why the case, to me, matters right here in 2023.
We're gonna post that so everybody has it, and it's very important to get these letters out. And when you send it out, though, and this is correct, Lisa, right? You don't want to go into Sirhan's innocence, because that's not really relevant to these hearings. So you're just wasting your time. So
So I've put the talking points, because Sirhan has never had, criminal record in the jail, no incidences of violence initiated by him.
And he's 78.
Clean record, everybody has signed off on his rehabilitation. And significantly, the parole board did think he was ready for release, because they already, recommended him the last time. So this time we want the governor to take notice, which is why it's also important to sign the petition, because the petition is to the governor.
Right. All right. So get those letters out. And like I said, we'll have all the links up. So let's talk about the RFK assassination, because Lisa, I think of all the assassinations, I think this is the easiest one to prove that it was a conspiracy, but it might be one of the hardest details to explain to everybody the entire picture of what actually happened, which I think you do tremendously in your book. But it is difficult.
Yeah, again, it takes a lot of pages to do it. But most simply, the official story, of course, is that after Bobby Kennedy gave his speech, he left the back of the stage, went through a kitchen pantry area, was shaking hands with busboys and stuff. And then Sirhan stepped out, pulled a gun, and fired. Kennedy fell down bleeding, wasn't dead immediately, was rushed to the hospital, and died 26 hours later. And the police have told us repeatedly there was only ever one gunman, therefore it was Sirhan. Everybody who was near Sirhan saw him pull out a gun and fire at Kennedy. So how could the truth be otherwise? But significant problem, the people who saw them both at the moment of the shooting, and there were 4 really good witnesses on this, said they were facing each other and about 3 feet apart, whereas Bobby Kennedy was shot from behind his right ear. Now, Sirhan's in front of him. How the heck can he reach around behind him to shoot him in the ear? And they say, oh, well, Sirhan just lunged and the witnesses missed it. No, these witnesses never took their eyes off them, because as soon as they saw the gun come out, they're like, oh my God. They're not turning away and missing anything at that point. They're completely focused on that. And Sirhan is firing, Kennedy is here, but somebody is shooting Kennedy from back here. And in my book, I talk about two witnesses, and if we have time today, I'll talk about that too, who saw a guy in a white busboy uniform, right, with his hand to Kennedy's head, assuming that there was a gun there, he's probably killing him. And that could not have been Sirhan because he wasn't there. He wasn't wearing white, didn't have the busboy uniform. So very, and it's the autopsy report that shows us, because there's significant powder burns, and you only get that when the gun is very close. So the coroner and the criminalist took pig's ears, and they shot at progressively different distances until they could match the pattern. And that was about 1.5 inches. And there's no way, if Sirhan's 3 feet in front of him, he can shoot him from 1.5 inches behind. Case closed.
And that's game over. That's
whatever
game over.
else happened,
Right.
Sirhan could not have killed Kennedy.
But before we get into that, Lisa, because I want to go into more on Thomas Noguchi's autopsy and everything, but let's talk a little bit about RFK. What was going on there? He decides to run for president, and let's talk about his great speech the day that Martin Luther King was assassinated. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because he basically, this was way before cell phones and 24-hour news cycles, and he was basically giving the news to these people in Indianapolis. And could you tell that great story?
Yes. So a dark and rainy night in Chicago, and again, no cell phones, no internet. So there was a rumor that somebody had tried to assassinate Martin Luther King, but he had survived. That's what the crowd was initially told. And Kennedy was very late to his speech. And the reason for that is he was rewriting what the speechwriters had written for him. He's like, no, that's not going to do. So this is a speech he wrote himself, and it's fairly short. But I found this lovely quote from a young white woman who was there. She was 16 years old, part of the crowd, very afraid because she could feel the anger building in the crowd. And she said, and then Kennedy came out. The minute he started talking, it was like the laying on of hands. Every word out of his mouth was a bomb. The whole crowd was swept up in the emotion, and I stopped being scared. And he announced that King had been murdered. And the news, she says, was like wham, wham, wham. He said the words, but I couldn't understand the context. She said it was like cartoons in her head. You could feel the shock going through. And as they flew out of Chicago, they looked back, and a lot of the city was burning. But the area where Robert Kennedy had spoke did not riot and did not burn, because he told them, look, I know how you feel. My brother was killed too, but he was killed by a white man, meaning, it wasn't a racial thing. And so he was acknowledging, I don't even, have that in common with you. But he's like, I know how angry and sad you feel because somebody very dear to me was killed. And I want justice too, is kind of the implied message. And then he ended with a great quote from Aeschylus: even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until, God, I'm gonna cry, until in our own despair against our will comes wisdom through the awful grace of God. And then he closed by saying, what we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, and a feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be Black. And then he went on to ask for prayers and ended with, let's dedicate us to what the Greeks wrote so many years ago: to tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world. Let us dedicate ourselves to that and say a prayer for our country and for our people. I mean, can you imagine the grace to write that?
Unbelievable.
Because he was a friend of Martin Luther King.
Yes.
This is not usually reported correctly, because you'll hear that, he had Hoover tape, bug Dr. King's offices. And that's true. But the reason Bobby authorized that is he was trying to prove to Hoover that Martin Luther King was not a communist. Right. What he never approved was the bugging of hotel rooms. And of course, Hoover didn't ask because he knew he wouldn't have approved it. So that was a completely separate thing. And the FBI was trying to get King to just pull away or kill himself, or, there's a whole story there we're not going to go into today. But he and Bobby were friends, and they were both working for peace. And they were also very careful as a political thing not to be too supportive of each other, because each set of their supporters was a little suspicious of the other set. So, they felt sometimes they could do more separately, in parallel rather than directly together standing on the same stage. But
Lisa, what amazing words. I mean, just an unbelievable expression of love and unity. And it's just something we don't have anymore. We don't have that today from any of our leaders, any of our politicians. It just doesn't exist.
Yeah, I was thinking, when is the last time I ever heard a politician use the word love?
Right.
And Kennedy actually, at RFK's funeral, Ted Kennedy read from a speech Bobby had given in South Africa in '66, where he really talked about love. And he's like, I don't mean love like we all talk about it in the TV commercials. He's like, I mean real love. We need more real love for each other. And, really an incredible speech. So
we're so ready to jump on anything these days, to fight and to have arguments and rip the other side to shreds. And I feel like the Kennedys were just so, the opposite of that. They really wanted to bring the country together. And maybe that's unfortunately
one of the reasons they were killed. Because division sells, hatred sells. When you get the left and the right fighting each other, they're not looking up at the rich and the poor, right? And Kennedy's like, wait. We have this upper class that's making these bad decisions and all these poor people who need help.
Right.
And that was like a sea change. And I didn't understand till I started getting into this how different they were from most of the Democrats, even of their time. They really stood out. They were different.
And Lisa, your raw emotion there when you were saying those quotes on Bobby Kennedy, it reminds me, it takes me back to the train ride back after when RFK was assassinated. And me and Bill weren't born yet, but I've seen that footage, and it's just amazing. When they're bringing the body back from California, and all the people on the railroad tracks lined up, black people, white people, Latinos, people of all colors and different classes, and it was almost
up signs, we love you, Bobby, we miss you,
but
rest in peace.
What I take from that, Lisa, is the look on the faces of some of the people. It's almost like they realized, like, that's it, it's over. Like the last hope has just been taken from us, and everything is changing forever now. And
I, as a kid, I was, I'm trying to think of my age. I was very young when he was shot, but there was a documentary that aired a few years later, and that's where I remember seeing the train ride. By the way, it was from New York to Boston. They flew the body to New York because he was a senator from New York, so they had a public ceremony there, and then they took him to the Arlington grave. But as a kid, when I watched that footage, in my head, I thought, oh my God, the greatest politician of my generation is dead, and I'm just a kid. Like, who's going to help me when I get older? I actually had that thought.
And that's the way, when I go back and look at that, me and Bill weren't even born yet, and it's already over for us. I mean, that's the way, when you look at the faces of the people, it's unbelievable. Like everything is changing now. That's the last hope. And that was it. And like Bill said earlier, like politics today is pick a side and stick with the side. And the one side is always right, the side that you pick. And it's like, no, you have to look at everything separate. And each issue, the governor makes a decision that we don't agree with, you call him out, whether he's your party or he isn't your party.
Yeah, I tell people you have to stop binary thinking. Binary thinking is our side is good, your side is bad.
Right.
Realistic thinking is our side has plus points and minus points, your side has plus points and minus points. Wouldn't it be awesome if we could find points of agreement and work together?
Right.
That's what I'd like to see.
And have real open dialogue and discussion. Yeah. We just, again, we don't have that. We have investigations upon investigations upon investigations and investigating. Right. What's the point? What, you're wasting taxpayer money, you're wasting time. There are so many things in this country. Everything that our politicians today promise they're going to fix, those are the things that need to be fixed. We don't need more investigations.
And the thing is, Sirhan's sitting in prison. I mean, the taxpayers are footing that bill, and we're housing people
it's
who
cheaper
should
to
be
release
paroled.
it.
Yeah. I mean,
You want to
it's
save
just,
money, free the older prisoners. And study after study has shown, once you hit 70, you are not going to go out and do a gun crime. It's like very rare,
Well,
infinitesimally small cases where that happens.
but you haven't
You know.
seen Tulsa King, I guess, then, Lisa. I don't know.
What is it called?
Called Tulsa King.
the new series with Sylvester Stallone.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
That's
Yeah,
a show
and
worth it.
sometimes I can't help but wonder if those things aren't like, I don't know, psychological warfare to have you say exactly that.
Could be.
Well, you know what,
Who knows?
Lisa, let's get back to the autopsy, Thomas Noguchi's autopsy. So it absolutely proves, the autopsy absolutely proves that Sirhan could not have killed Bobby Kennedy.
Right. And so because of that, there was a guy from the DA's office who tried to pressure Noguchi. He's like, can't you say a few feet instead of a few inches? They all knew it was a problem. They all knew. I mean, it wasn't like he made this magic discovery that the police hadn't considered. They knew from day one that Sirhan had not fired the bullets. Plus, there were more bullets in the pantry than could have come from one gun. There were at least 13 shots that we know of for fact.
And the gun only held
we have
8, right?
photos and video because Kennedy was shot. There were 2 bullets removed from Kennedy. 5 other people had a bullet removed from them. The police told us for fact there were 3 holes in the ceiling, and they said that's 1 bullet because one went up, ricocheted, came back down, but one stayed in the ceiling and got lost in the inner ceiling space. Okay, so that's your 8 bullets. But now we have the FBI photos that show 4 more bullet holes in the door frames right behind Kennedy, 2 on one side and 2 on the other of the door that he walked through. Actually, of the door next to the one he walked through, if I want to be completely accurate, and I always do. I'm a little obsessive that way. Okay, but a bullet cannot go into a door frame and then pull itself out of the wood and turn around and hit a person, right? So those are obviously more bullets. And we have pictures.
Unless Arlen Specter is in.
Yeah, unless Arlen Specter's there.
Instead of one magic bullet, there's like 6 in this case.
Yeah, so there's 12 bullets in the pantry, and then in a direct line from the pantry, the stage door that Kennedy exited, there was a bullet in that frame too that would be directly in line with, a shot headed in Kennedy's direction. So provably, and that was photographed in an AP photo where 2 policemen, Polly said the bullet is still in the hole. I mean, how do you get more obvious than that?
Yeah.
So there's, like I said, there's at least 13 bullets. Sirhan's gun maximum could only hold 8. No time to reload. It was taken from his hand as soon as they could get it. And in fact, when the police tested Sirhan's gun, they couldn't match any of the bullets from any of the victims or the doors or wall frames, any of it, to Sirhan's gun. And there were a number of witnesses who said it looked like a cap gun, it sounded like a cap gun. And I have pages of those in my book and many more in my files. At some point it's redundant. I don't want to put every possible statement, but that's what people were seeing and hearing. And what's really interesting, and I didn't know this when I wrote my book, but after I wrote it, somebody alerted me to this plot against Jimmy Carter in 1979. And I'd like to see what the context of it was, because it might have been to pressure him to get the Shah into the country because he didn't want to admit the Shah, and they ultimately did. But get the name of the people.
Oh, it was Oswaldo.
Was Lee Harvey
Oswaldo.
Or somebody. Pardon?
It was like one name was Lee Harvey, and then the other guy was like Oswaldo Esposito.
Yeah, I think it's like Robert Lee Harvey.
Yeah, you
and
put them
Oswaldo.
together, it's like Lee Harvey.
I mean, it's like,
Oswald.
how could you not get the message, right? And so here's the thing. They picked them up because one guy was firing blanks to distract from the shooters. That was the acknowledged plot, but he shot his blanks too soon and caught the Secret Service attention, and they pulled him away. And at first the media tried to say, oh no, there was nothing there. And then later they're like, wow, there was a real plot and several people were picked up and taken off the streets. And so it's like they were running the exact same plot again, except this time they didn't hypnotize the guy and he screwed it up.
Right.
So.
And also, Lisa, the acoustic test picked up like 16 shots, right? Or something like that?
Well, the acoustic test picked up 13.
13, okay.
In my book, I look at all the witness statements of where bullets were retrieved or recovered. And you can get to 16 or 17 or even more, because that's before you count all those holes in the wall that the Charles Collier, the police photographer said.
Once you get to 9, it's game over. I mean,
yeah. in my book, I argue that there were not just two shooters, that there were multiple shooters.
Right.
And Sirhan's blank gun, by going off first, pulls all eyes to him and his gun. And the other shooters then kind of have cover, and they're using hidden guns. It's not like they're sticking a rifle through the crowd that everybody's going to see. In one case, somebody thought he was firing from under a towel on his arm. And, I looked at like the CIA, if you've ever been to the CIA museum at Langley, they show you like one that'll hide inside the palm. You would never see it, but it'll fire a 22 bullet just from a ring on your finger. And you pull the finger and it shoots a 22.
Wow.
There's also a Navy gun that shoots from the top of a white glove. So you can put a white glove up and it has like a little plunger action that'll fire a 22. So there's all these other ways, which would explain why so few people saw other guns. But that said, people saw at least 4 guns in the pantry. So what the police says, just again, a flat out fabrication, because there were witnesses who saw other guns and described them to the police. There were also 2 other people picked up at the hotel that night. One was named Michael Wayne, and the other was Robert Frazier, who was detained for several hours because he's kind of wandering around suspiciously in the bushes. And people thought that was weird. They picked him up, and his story kind of didn't check out, but I can't find anything more than that. It's always hard to know what's real. But Michael Wayne's history is incredibly suspicious, and he spent the night bugging people to get press passes. And he would tell people, I'm a collector and I'll trade them. I don't know of any press pass trading convention. Maybe it's out there. I mean, people trade the craziest things, but what a press pass was at the Ambassador Hotel, it was an all access backstage pass, like at a concert. You could go anywhere with a press pass. And that's why the conspirators would have wanted them. And there's a good argument to be made. I hope I made that in my book, that Michael Wayne was kind of the team leader on the ground. Putting the people in place, trying to figure out. No one knew for sure when Kennedy was going to come down to speak. No one knew for sure which way he would go afterwards, because he was supposed to go down and talk to the overflow crowd, which would have required going out the back of the stage and down left, or out the back of the stage and to the right through to the media, which he often did at his press. He usually talked to the print media before he left, because in his early years, he himself was a print reporter. And so he knew what it was like to feel like second fiddle to the TV media and stuff. So he always, kind of as a favor, always made time for that. So anybody who knew his pattern would have known that eventually he would be coming through the pantry. So, yeah.
And Lisa, so we already proved that Sirhan couldn't have fired a kill shot. He didn't fire any shots, and the other victims couldn't be traced to his gun.
Right. And a panel re-examined that in 1975, and they said they could at that point link all the bullets to each other, like they could have all come from the same gun, because of course they're limiting it to the 7 that they said were there, not counting the one in the ceiling. But they still couldn't link those 7 to Sirhan's gun. And the first part was reported, only one gun was used, but the second part, but it wasn't Sirhan's, was not reported.
Right. So now let's get on to some of the witnesses, and let's talk about Sandra Serrano and the girl in the polka dot dress, and then we'll get into what Special Unit Senator Pena and Hernandez, what these 2 guys did to the investigation. Yeah. So you want to talk about Sandra Serrano?
Yeah, let's talk about Sandra Serrano. So while Kennedy's in giving his speech, there's a young girl, volunteer, 20-year-old, sitting on the back fire escape. So it's like directly across from the stage, and in a corner, easy for somebody to come and go through there. So there was kind of a guy stationed there who was supposed to be checking ID for people, but instead he had kind of a maroon coat, which didn't match any of the official hotel colors. And 2 NBC producer wives said the guy had like what looked like a radio up to his ear. And she's like, he didn't seem like he belonged there. He wasn't. Everybody was happy and they were celebrating. It was a big day. It was a party. It's a victory party. And this guy looked very serious and like he was on the radio the whole time. Well, right outside the door where that guy is standing, Sandy Serrano's sitting on the steps because it's hot inside and she's trying to cool off. And as she's sitting there, and this is, I think, right after Kennedy came down or so, or just before, three people come up and step over her. One is a girl in a polka dot dress, and the dress stuck out to her because she had just seen one like that at the store, and so it's like it was a fresh memory. But she said the girl had a turned up nose, like a Bob Hope ski slope sort of nose. So very distinctive nose that she couldn't not remember, dark hair. And then there were two guys with her. One was in a gold sweater and dark pants and a little bit huskier and older. And then the third one she described exactly matched Sirhan's description. Of course, she didn't know at that time who it was, but he looked a little disheveled. He was wearing a blue top and blue jeans. And none of the three of them looked like they belonged because her dress was shabby, not elegant. And in those days, I didn't realize this, but in those days, campaign events were kind of like going to the high school formal. I mean, you dressed up for that. Nowadays, people show up in their jeans, for everything, for a presidential inauguration, right? But in those days, that wouldn't have happened. And so they really stuck out as being underdressed. And so Sandy noticed these people, they go in, and about 15 minutes later, she hears what she thought were 6 backfires of a car. And frankly, they could have been 6 backfires of a car. So I don't discount that. And they tried to do sound tests to prove there's no way she could have heard shots in the pantry. But remember the guy with the radio at the door right behind her? She could have heard 6 shots over his radio. You know what I mean? If he was standing right there a few feet and she didn't know he was there, that might be what she heard. But in any case, a few seconds after these shots, 2 of the 3 people come running back out, flying down the stairs. And the girl in the polka dot dress is yelling, we shot him, like, good going. And I'm thinking the girl is talking to the guy with the radio because he's part of the team, right? As she's running out the door, she's like, we did it, we got him. And Sandy, of course, not knowing what's going on, is like, who did you shoot? And the girl says, Senator Kennedy, and keeps running. And I've been to the Ambassador Hotel, and at that point, that fire escape, if you run down, you're in instant blackness. There's a parking lot back there, but it's a little bit up a hill, and there was like bushes. It's super easy to just like disappear almost instantly. So it's like as soon as they were out the door and on the fire escape, they knew they were home free. So she didn't care who knew, didn't matter. No one was going to catch them in time, and no one did. And the police did put out an APB for a guy in a gold sweater and a girl in a white dress with dark polka dots, dark hair in a bouffant style. And interestingly enough, they canceled the guy's description within a few minutes. Like somebody shut that down right away. But the girl's description, they issued a new APB for just her, and that sat there for 2 weeks before the police canceled it. They knew, and the reason it wasn't just Sandy. As Sandy is telling her story to a reporter live on national TV, one of the guys sitting nearby is like, I saw that girl. And he starts telling the police, look, she was holding Sirhan right before the shooting. I saw her. She was holding him on the tray stand. The tray stand, Sirhan's pretty short, so the tray stand would have given him an elevated view. And she was literally standing up there on the tray stand with him, the tray stacker, and holding him in place. And under hypnosis later, many years later, Sirhan remembered the girl looking up and to her right, which is really interesting because up and to her right would be where I argue, and some witnesses say, there was a shooter on the table. That's important because somebody was firing bullets from Sirhan's position. If he's firing blanks, why are there still bullets coming from that angle? Well, if there's a shooter on the table and Sirhan's right next to the table, it's pretty easy. And again, it'd be a hidden gun, but there's just so much evidence that this was not a small 1 or 2 person operation. It's a very carefully planned intelligence operation. E. Howard Hunt and Eugenio Martinez during the Watergate break-in aftermath were interviewed by numerous, magazines, and they said, look, we rehearsed that operation for weeks. And he's like, that's how we do all our operations. We go in, we leave nothing to chance. We rehearse and rehearse and rehearse. We take the teams in and out. And in my book, I even talk about what looked like a rehearsal at one point. In fact, a couple of days before, it looked like there was a rehearsal because Kennedy spoke at the hotel 2 days earlier. And a lot of the same people were seeing a busty girl in a polka dot dress and, so on. And so it's like, this is not a small mob hit. This is a sophisticated intelligence operation.
And let's talk about Pena and Hernandez. So these guys are
Okay.
not just any detectives. Let's talk about
Exactly.
their background and
as
intelligence.
Right. As soon as the crime happens, the LAPD forms what they call special, they first named it Special Operations Center. And it's funny because special operation is code for intelligence. And I think they realized that might be recognized. So they quickly changed it to Special Unit Senator, which sounds more innocuous. And they hired almost entirely guys from intel backgrounds, Navy intelligence, military intelligence, CIA, FBI, people with real intelligence backgrounds. And Manny Pena had all kinds of ties to the CIA. And his brother even said at his retirement, his brother was interviewed on TV. He's like, "Oh yeah, Manny's really proud of his service to the CIA over the years." And it was even in his little bio when he retired. Um, and he had worked with AID, the Agency for International Development, which is a well-known CIA favorite front. When they need to stick operatives in a country, they often use AID to do it. And Hernandez had a very similar background, and he was down interrogating dictators in Latin American countries and stuff, in places where the CIA was running operations. He was training their intelligence forces how to do torturing, kidnapping, and that kind of stuff. So, I mean, these are not two cops beat cops. These are two highly sophisticated intelligence. So when they set up Special Unit Senator, the chief of detectives said, "Well, there was only one man I considered for the job, and that was Manny Pena. He wanted him to run the conspiracy angle, because if there was a conspiracy, if anybody was in on it, Manny if he didn't know before the fact, he definitely knew immediately after the fact, and he was going to be their cover-up guy." I saw a flow chart from the LAPD that showed, like, when somebody's interviewed, it goes here, and then it goes here, and at some point it stops at Manny Pena's desk, and he has sole authority to decide if that witness gets interviewed again or if it dies right there. And you'll see on Sandy Serrano's interview sheet, because every interview gets typed up and summarized and it gets a cover sheet. And on his cover sheet for Sandy Serrano, no further polka dot dress story, phony. Well, how did they get Sandy? They forced Sandy basically to recant her story. And Hank Hernandez took the 20-year-old, which at that time was still not legal drinking age, but he took her out for wine and steak. And she insisted on bringing her aunt because she didn't want to be alone with the police, because she didn't trust them. Smart girl, very smart girl. And so they get her, they give her some wine, buys her a huge big dinner, and then takes her back to the station. It's 10 o'clock. And then he puts her in a chair. He had not told her this, that they were going to do a lie detector test after dinner. He sprung this on her. She insisted her aunt be in the room. Hank Hernandez said, "Oh, your aunt doesn't need to be here." Her aunt, trusting the police, is like, "Oh, okay, I'll sit outside and wait." Sandy's like, "No, I want you in here." And Hank's like, "Don't worry. He's been nice to them all night, right? Whining and dining them." So the aunt sits outside. He straps her into the chair, starts with the innocuous questions. She tricks him, because they ask a bunch of questions. He's trying to show that the polygraph works. She tricks him and gives him a fake name at one point. He doesn't pick it up on the polygraph because he's not a real polygraph operator. A polygraph doesn't really tell whether somebody's telling the truth or lying. It tells whether they're nervous or not. That's all a polygraph does.
Right.
And she wasn't nervous when she was deliberately lying about something unimportant. So he didn't pick it up.
Yeah.
Right. And so she's like, "See, this doesn't really work." But after 2 hours, he wears her down. He runs through what I'd call a whole session. It's like it's a script with rises and falls, as if it was carefully orchestrated. At the end of it, after 2 hours of this, because he keeps repeating the script, when he gets to the end, if she hasn't changed her story, he goes right back to the beginning. And she realizes she's never getting out of that chair and going home until she says there was no girl. So in the end, she recants, and then they go through all the files. Anybody who saw a girl in a polka dot dress, and I have at least 20 of them in my own files, and I know there's still more out there because other people have ones that I don't have. But all of them on the cover sheet, polka dot dress, funny, no further investigation.
And they're basically, Pena and Hernandez are basically treating Sandy Serrano like she's a suspect.
Like she's the criminal. Yeah. And interestingly enough, with Michael Wayne, it was just the opposite. Because here's a guy who has uncanny knowledge of the layout of the Robert Kennedy campaign headquarters, despite the fact that he's an extreme right-winger who hangs out with known Nazis. Now, wouldn't that make you suspicious? When he says accurately, they ask him if he'd ever been arrested. He says accurately, yes. Hernandez stops it and says, you don't have to say that. You were a juvenile at the time. We're going to let you say no. We'll do it again. And so he goes back and then, they change his answer.
Unbelievable.
And when they ask him at the end, were you running for a phone? Because that was his excuse of why he was captured running from the pantry immediately after the shooting. Witnesses thought he had a gun in a rolled up poster. And it looks like that he handed the gun off in mid lobby, hit somebody. The other guy took the gun out of the hotel. He's caught without the gun. Lucky for him, right? But he says he was running to find a phone, but he was running away from the room of the phones. And his story, everything he says is like a provable lie. And Hank Hernandez lets him off and tells him he passed the test, and he changes his answer on the transcript. So during the audio tape, which I listened to, Wayne, they asked Wayne, were you running for a phone? He said no. And in the transcript, it says yes. They just lie.
Wow.
It's so shocking. It's so, wait till we get to the bullets.
Yeah. So Lisa, now we proved that Sirhan was firing blanks. He didn't shoot anybody, including the other victims besides Bobby. Now let's get into how he got there, how he was put in that position. And now we're going to get into hypnosis and the MK Ultra mind control program that the CIA was working on for years. And this is where it really gets ugly, because the stuff that the CIA was doing on innocent, unknowing victims, testing LSD and hypnosis and testing on people with mental problems and cutting the heads off
they literally
animals.
drove some people to suicide.
Right.
That looks like they pushed another guy out a window because he wasn't being driven to suicide.
And then even with animals, though, the stuff like cutting heads off animals.
They cut heads off of monkeys and tried to transplant them so that maybe someday they could put an agent's head on a different body.
Unbelievable.
It's like Nazi horrific experiments. And I know for most people, somebody who read my book said, Lisa, that chapter really freaked me out. I had no idea the CIA was doing that level of crazy stuff. They were implanting electrodes in the brain. They did it to a bull, and they could make it charge or stop based on the electrical signal that they would give. They literally could turn people into automatons physically, but they found a simpler way, really, through, and not just hypnosis. They found that a combination of hypnosis and drugs worked even better, because the drugs would ensure they could not remember later what had happened. And that's part of the problem with Sirhan's case. He has no memory of the shooting. Even hypnotized by sympathetic people years later, they can't retrieve the memory because it wasn't stored. It was chemically forbidden from being storing in the brain. That happens. And most people, when they're hypnotized, frankly, don't remember what they do under hypnosis. That's a common side effect.
And I could attest to that, Lisa.
Yeah, go ahead and talk about that.
Well, two prior times before this, I tried hypnosis and it didn't work. And then this was in Salem, Massachusetts for Halloween. I was there with my girlfriend at the time, and there was this hypnotist on the street and taking volunteers to come up. And she volunteered me, so I went up, and I was up there with, I believe, 3 other people, and he put us under hypnosis. And he said, when I was under hypnosis, he said, now you're not going to feel anything, okay? And he had a broom, I think it was, or something, and he was lightly hitting me on the side of the arm and rubbing the broom up and down on my arm and stuff. And I didn't flinch. I didn't feel nothing. And then when it was all done, I said, I said to my girlfriend at the time, I said, boy, that didn't work. That was a waste of time. And she said, well, you better watch the video, because she was taping it with a cell phone, the video. And when I seen the video, I was like, I can't believe this. Like, I have no memory of that, of feeling anything. I didn't even flinch. And I'm somebody that does not like people invading my personal space like that. I would have definitely flinched and, maybe put a fist at him. It was definitely, Bill knows that. But it was
a little bit about you, Sean.
But it was just so stunning to see that video. And the thing is, if she wasn't videoing that, I would have said that didn't work.
Believe it.
So I wouldn't have believed it. I would have said, I'd have said, no such thing. That's nothing. But the video, It shows right on there. So I could attest that it works. And Lisa, you in your book, you do a great job of setting examples of hypnosis and how certain people are susceptible to it more than others. And Sirhan
Right.
was one person that was in a very
And
low
he was at
percentage.
the most highly
Yes.
susceptible end. Yeah,
Right.
there's a scale of 1 to 5. It's standard among hypnosis professionals, and 5 is the most hypnotizable. 1 can't be hypnotized at all. Most people are 2, 3, or 4.
Right.
But there are a few. It's like a bell curve. Most people are in the 3 range, but at both ends there are individuals. And Alan Dulles has a quote where he's like, "Oh yeah, if you get the right individual, you can play them like a phonograph, like a needle on a phonograph." And that's what they did with Sirhan, because he's so highly hypnotized.
You could just never escape Dulles, Lisa. Every show we do, we have to mention Dulles. His name pops up everywhere.
Well, he's everywhere. How can you not mention it?
He really is.
During that period.
No doubt about it.
Yeah, so the Navy, the Air Force, all of them have their own hypnosis programs, but the CIA especially. I tracked down some documents on the CIA's own reading room, because when they release documents through FOIA, they post them there and you can go search them. And there's one where they're basically saying all these academics are wrong because we've already shown in the field what they say can't be done. In other words, you can make people do things against their will. And it's not as simple as, like, Bill, if I told you, I'm going to hypnotize you and then I'm going to ask you to go kill your mother, you're not going to do it. But if I hypnotize you and I say, there's a CIA person who's trying to kill you because of this great podcast you've got going, and she's going to look exactly like your mother. Yeah. And if you don't kill her first, she's going to kill you. And she's going to sound and cry just like your mother. And if you're highly hypnotizable in something like that, then you might kill her. So that's how it works. They don't get you to do something you wouldn't normally do. They find a way to change the setup so it is something you would normally do.
And how old was Sirhan at that time?
He was 24. And that's interesting because California state law has been changed, because it turns out your brain isn't fully hardened into adult form until age 25. It's still malleable. And so they want people who are 24 or younger to be released from parole because they were kind of too young to know what they were doing. And Sirhan, this wasn't his first country. He was born in Palestine when there was a Palestine. His family came to America when the Palestinian, in 1948, during the Palestinian-Israeli war there. He saw horrific things as a kid. And when you see a severed hand in the water bucket that you draw, when you see somebody killed right in front of you, the horrific things he grew up with, it traumatizes you very deeply, and it makes you dissociative, because you want to separate yourself from that pain. And dissociative people are more easily hypnotized. So it does all make sense. And the CIA described in the 50s, they had something called Operation Artichoke, or Project Artichoke. This was not MK Ultra. That was a separate set of projects. But this project, there's a document that says the question, the central question they're trying to answer is, can somebody of redacted origin be made to commit an act of attempted assassination as part of a bigger operation? And that's basically what happened in the pantry. Sirhan was hypnotized to fire without any understanding that that was part of an assassination. Years later, because Sirhan's defense team tried to hypnotize him in the 60s, believe it or not, hypnotizing people before trials or by the police was actually fairly common. It's kind of horrific now to think about it. And they did pass laws to protect the police from hypnotizing you into a confession for a crime you didn't commit. But they tried things like that, except this was Sirhan's defense team lawyers who hypnotized him and then said, Sirhan, there's Robert Kennedy, reach for your gun. This is under hypnosis. Do you see him, Sirhan? And fortunately, they couldn't implant the memories. They were trying very hard to implant a memory, but it didn't stick because Sirhan, some part of him is resistant to that falseness. But not 60 years later, but many years later, a hypnotist spent 60 hours with Sirhan and didn't try and lead the witness. He's like, okay, you're here. What do you see? What do you hear? Who's near you? Is there anybody to your left? Is there anybody to your right? What's going on? And in that scenario, Sirhan remembers being with a girl, a very attractive girl that he thought was extremely sexy. He thought he might get lucky, so he's following her around like a puppy dog. And at some point, he remembers being on the tree stand with her. And then, like I said, he remembers her looking up to the right as after, it looks like Kennedy's coming, and he doesn't remember seeing Kennedy at all, because he wouldn't if he's short and the crowd was tall. And they put him in the middle. She walked him over to the middle of the room, and then she pinched him in the back a certain way. And he said, suddenly I thought I was back at the shooting range. He'd spent that morning at a shooting range in Pasadena firing at targets.
Wow.
And so when she pinched him, he starts seeing the targets again. He pulls out his gun, and as far as he knows, he's firing at targets. All of a sudden, he feels himself being choked. And that almost brings him out of the hypnosis, because now his life is threatened. And he realizes he's in this room and he's got a gun in his hand and somebody's lying bleeding. He's like, oh my God, did I shoot somebody? And then it's like he's back under the hypnosis again. He doesn't come out of hypnosis until like the next morning. In fact, he asks them during the night, he will talk about any subject under the sun except who he is and who he knows. And when they ask him, are you married, Sirhan? Well, they didn't even use his name because they didn't know he was at first. But they're like, are you married? He's like, I don't know. I'm like, what kind of car did you drive to get here? I don't remember. I mean, just simple questions.
Wow.
There's no reason to lie about that, but he literally can't remember because they programmed him not to, because that gives his associates time to get away. Right. And he asked them, have I been before the magistrate? And it wasn't until he went to the judge, then they found him shivering in his cell. And when he came out of hypnosis before his defense team, he got the shivers. So I feel like that's probably the moment he really came out of hypnosis. So, but can you imagine? So now you're accused of this crime. Everybody says you did it. You have no memory except that one moment of standing with a gun over a bleeding body. You're going to think you did it too, right? Even though you don't remember it. So that's why it's hard for him to argue for his own innocence, because he really doesn't remember.
Yeah.
So basically, he's over there firing blanks, and he's thinking he's at the gun range. And that's basically, and like I said, there was a shooter.
Right. Yeah, there were witnesses, credible witnesses. One of them was the police's, not the police, it was the fire department's photographer. Very credible guy. A lot of people knew him and respected him. He goes, the shooter was on the table, and he didn't say that wasn't Sirhan, because here's the other thing. Everyone who saw Shooter, they all said he looked exactly like Sirhan. They were using lookalikes, and that is also the mark of an intelligence operation, because that's a very common technique. So no matter who somebody saw, it's easy to put Sirhan's face on them because they were similar enough. In fact, Munir Sirhan, the younger brother of Sirhan Sirhan, I showed him the picture of Michael Wayne, and he said, he's like, Lisa, my first thought was, oh my God, that's my brother. Wow. And then he's like, but it's not. But that's how similar at a glance they were.
Yeah.
And the thing is, Lisa, we know that, Richard Helms ended up destroying a lot of the MK Ultra files, so we don't know as much as we should about it. But I think at some point,
and no one ever subpoenaed the CIA for the Sirhan records like they did the JFK records. In fact, at one point, the HSCA was considering including. They reinvestigated JFK and RFK. The HSCA is the House Select Committee on Assassinations, formed in the 70s in the wake of the Watergate investigations, the Rockefeller Commission, the Church Committee investigation, the Pike Committee investigation, and they kept turning up stuff about CIA and assassinations. And part of the Church Committee records were making it look like the CIA might have been involved in JFK's death. And so they reopened that as a separate investigation, and then also added MLK, and they almost added RFK. And the way Lynn Mangan, who was close to the Sirhan family, she was a neighbor, but a very smart woman who loved to read. And she's like, she knew Sirhan. She's like, he seems so sweet and innocent. There's no way he could have done this. So she really dug into the case. And she told me that they pressured Mary Sirhan, the mother, and said, we're going to indict Munir as a co-conspirator if you press the HSCA. We're going to frame him too.
Wow.
And, I don't know if that's true because I'm not Lynn, and I don't know if she was lying to me or telling me the truth, but it rings true as something they might do. So.
And Lisa, I think that, the quest to create a Manchurian candidate, I think at some point the CIA realized how risky that is to have a programmed assassin fire bullets, and you have other backup assassins, and the real assassin And the
It's
thing
really
is,
cheap to hire a mob guy to do
sure,
it.
but
There's really no reason
to have a program patsy is very doable.
Yes.
And if he's just
Yes.
firing blanks, then he's not a threat to the other assassins because he's only firing blanks. So if you have a team of 2 to 3 assassins and you have a program patsy, it's a perfect plan. It's
And
really
again,
a perfect plan.
it's like a magic deck.
Yes.
He pulls focus, and everybody's looking at
All
him.
the attention is on Sirhan.
And now, if you're the shooter who's standing right behind Kennedy and about to kill him, do you want a guy with real bullets firing at you while you're trying to kill?
Right.
No freaking way. I'm
No,
not taking that
absolutely
assignment. Not a chance in hell. But if they assure me, don't worry, the guy shooting in your direction is firing blanks. Don't worry. I'll take that if I'm an assassin. Yeah.
So Lisa, let's talk about the person that's in the best position to fire shots at RFK, and that's a last minute security guard. Eugene Thane Caesar. Let's talk about him. Yeah, let's talk about him and his connection to a name that we've talked about a lot in the show, Robert Mayhew.
Yes. All right. So Thane Eugene Caesar was a plumber, supposedly, who worked at Lockheed and had top secret clearance. That's the Lockheed facility in Burbank here is the Skunk Works facility where they made the U-2 and other top secret spy planes. And supposedly he's a plumber there. It's funny because in one of the documents, Helms explains that we use the term plumber and plumbing when we're doing coup plotting.
Nice.
So I always thought that was funny that he was a plumber, because I think he was really a plumber as one of his jobs. But he also moonlit as a security guard. Funny thing is, he only started working for that company a week before the assassination. And really funny thing, the criminalist who basically lied about the ballistic evidence, and I'll talk about that briefly. Yeah, Dwayne Wolfer. Later, when he retires, he goes to work for that same Ace security company that Thane Caesar worked with.
Well, he became the CEO, didn't he?
Yeah, he became president. Yeah,
kind of a nice consolation prize there.
Exactly. And the thing is, these security companies are often formed and staffed by former or current intelligence people for a lot of reasons. If you need access to a building, what better than to have the security staff on your team? I mean, I know where the CIA works downtown in LA. I can't say because they'd probably come kill me, but I think a lot of people know where it is. I feel like I work at there's a corner in New Orleans where all the intelligence agencies were. I'm on that equivalent corner because the Secret Service is there, the FBI is there, South Korean intelligence is right across the street. So it's like, it's one of those open secrets everybody knows, but no one can talk about it. But anyway, the security in my own building, one day I walked in and somebody said, "Oh, so you're Lisa Pease." And I just thought that freaked me out because it's like, who's asking? And when I was writing my book, I'm working like right in the building where the CIA is.
Wow.
And I remembered one time at lunch, because I usually wrote during my lunch hour, I was just putting my laptop away and I saw a guy pull a cell phone away from like the back of my computer and calmly start walking away. And I started to follow him and he walked faster and faster. And he was tall and long-legged and I couldn't quite keep up. I almost would have had to sprint. But I had the distinct thought, I bet he just downloaded and copied my whole book, because that's the kind of stuff they do. And there was another time where I was followed in the plaza there. It's so weird, the stuff that happens. So, and I'm not paranoid. I mean, it's like I actually pulled a security guard over and pointed the guy out because at that time I didn't know the CIA was in the neighborhood. And I'm like, this guy is like following me. Will you keep an eye on him?
Unbelievable.
Like, oh, I see him. That's weird.
Wow.
Yeah.
Jeez.
And Lisa, let's tie. You do a great job in the book of tying Caesar to Robert Mayhew.
Mm-hmm.
Let's wrap that up.
Okay,
so talk with that.
Again, you've got a guard who's at Kennedy's side, who works for a CIA facility, is working for Ace Security, but he's also working for Howard Hughes at the time that Mayhew is running Howard Hughes's Nevada operations. And Hughes brought in Mayhew. The reason he asked for Mayhew is he's like, I want to get closer to the CIA because I'm having problems getting my airline approved. And if I can do something for the CIA, they'll help me get TWA. And so it was an open agreement. And the CIA, through Mayhew, infiltrated the entire Hughes organization and later set up the Summa Corporation and apparently appeared to have siphoned some funds off. That's a whole nother story. But John Meyer worked for Howard Hughes. John Meyer was allowed in the room with Hughes. Mayhew was never allowed in the room with Hughes. Mayhew said that was his choice, that he didn't want to see a diminished man because he was like the public face of Hughes, and he wanted to, present a strong image. I think that's BS. I think Hughes refused to see Mayhew because he thought he was a bit of a thug, and he was. Mayhew was known as the assassin, even though he didn't do it himself. He was known as the guy who set up assassinations.
He brokered the deal with the mafia to kill Fidel Castro.
He was the mafia fixer, exactly. Right. And he didn't bring the CIA. I mean, he didn't bring the mafia to the CIA. The CIA brought the mafia to Mayhew.
Right.
It was a guy in CIA who introduced Mayhew to a king mobster, Johnny Roselli, in Las Vegas. So, and Mayhew's kind of chief of staff was a former LAPD officer. Mayhew himself had worked with the LAPD to create a porno flick that was supposed to show a Soviet agent, seducing Sukarno, the leader of Indonesia at the time. He was wildly popular. CIA tried and failed to assassinate him, so they were trying to discredit him. And so Mayhew had deep ties into the LAPD. The other place Mayhew had deep ties was into the mind control group at the CIA, because that was being run out of the Office of Security. Right. The Office of Security is the group that ostensibly protects the CIA from the outside or the inside. If you have an agent who's about to spill secrets, the Office of Security is going to come talk to you and say, look, you're going to lose your pension. We're going to discredit you in the press. You'll be persona non grata, or you'll be dead. Which would you like? You could be silent too.
Wow.
So this is the group that he's working with. They run the mind control. So Mayhew connects to the mind control programs. He connects to Thane Caesar because he was his employee as a bodyguard for Hughes. And Thane Caesar's records, because I Google all the time, and there are these things called public record databases. Like one of them is like whitepages.com. You can look up people, and I only found this, looking for former friends or whatever. You want to find their address or their phone number and get in touch. And one day it was actually LinkedIn was the first time I saw this with Caesar. I assumed it was a joke, but there was a Thane Caesar profile on LinkedIn, a very famous, site for connecting business. And it said CIA contract agent. And I'm like, ha, 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 I wonder who put that up there. But then I thought, what if, just on a wild chance, what if that's true? And so I started actually paying some of the other services that aren't free. And it's like 30 to 60 bucks for any of these services to do a public record search. And that means anytime you applied for a car loan, a house loan, you voted, you declared your employer on any employment statement. And I got 3 different sets of information, but they all had a lot of overlap, and they all listed Caesar as a contract agent of the CIA. And if he meant it as a joke, it's pretty weird, because the employers he listed were all very close to the CIA. In fact, it's funny because the one that might have looked farther from the CIA, he worked at GM at one point, which is interesting because he didn't ever live in Detroit, where GM has their offices. So, he has a post office box in Langley, Virginia, but he lives in LA. It's like, what's going on? You find these things out when you look at these public records. And so, I started writing these companies and asking some questions. I'm like, where do you get your records? And they explained to me what I just explained to you. And then I wrote another one of them. I'm like, why would you expose a CIA asset like that? No response. And, I haven't gone back to see if those records are now all gone or not, because I think once you die, those records get purged. So, and ostensibly he died after my book came out. How convenient. So I don't know if there are any remaining records. And I've never shared them, and I didn't print them or name them, because you're not supposed to use the data that way. And you sign an agreement to that effect. but I did show them in person to Robert Kennedy Jr. When Caesar died. I literally took my documents to him and said, now I can tell you, because he was willing to write about it. And that's why in his Instagram post that night, he called him a CIA agent, because I showed him the documents that proved Thane Caesar, the guy at Kennedy's right elbow. And here's the thing, Kennedy was not only shot behind the right ear, he was shot 3 times under the arm. Who better than the guy who's holding that arm than Thane Caesar, who's also a big bulky guy and with his own body could hide the gun. No one would see it. Wow. 2 of the shots, one went through clothing. Position. Yeah, exactly. So perfect position for all but the headshot, because then his arm would have been really exposed. And that's why I think it was the best somebody else with a hidden gun that got him in the head.
Right.
But I think Thane Caesar's job was to hold him down and kill him if he can.
Right.
Because there were other witnesses who saw him struggling with his bodyguard.
And of course, John Meyer brought his suspicions to J. Edgar Hoover. And Hoover said, we know it was CIA, we know it was Mayhew, but I can't do nothing about the CIA. Is basically
right. And when Meyer told me that, the only reason it rang true is I knew at that point the CIA had been blackmailing Hoover, but that's not widely known. I think at that point in time, I was like the only one who's like, why is no one talking about that? Because there were some records to that effect. And because at the start, when the CIA was forming, Hoover said, hey, I'm the intelligence agency. You don't need a separate one. Because at that point, the FBI had agents all over the world. So he saw it as direct competition on his turf. CIA wanted to silence him so they could set up their organization. So they got a photo of Hoover having sex with Clyde Tolson, his gay associate and lover. And then they used that. And they also evidently compromised some Congress people at the time. If you think Jeffrey Epstein, you think of what he was doing. It wasn't just about rich people having sex. It was getting political sexual blackmail, photographing and videoing all those encounters. And then they could go back to them and get whatever legislation they wanted passed or not passed. And so it started, like I said, I'm sure it didn't start with Hoover, but that was the first instance. And I'm pretty sure because that worked, the CIA has been doing that ever since.
Right. Well, Lisa, we've taken up a lot of your time tonight, but we appreciate it. I mean, this has been fantastic. Is there anything you want to say to wrap this up and anything we left out that we didn't discuss?
Well, I would just like people to consider, what if it was your son or daughter who was in Sirhan's position? It's like, what if it was you? You just happened to be, caught in some moment and somebody programmed you and you didn't even know you were doing it. Please have some sympathy. Please look at the links associated with this podcast. Please write a letter on Sirhan's behalf. It's really not fair. He's been in jail 2/3 of his life for a crime he provably didn't commit.
Provably. That's the key. Yeah. Provably did not commit.
And I would say, take time to look at some of the research that you've done, and other people have done. I think there's so much, I don't know, I guess like conspiracy theory fatigue, maybe, Lisa, yes, in this country, where people just say, you know what, he confessed to it. The police said that he did it. He's been
all the media says he did it.
The media said he did it. Nobody's really putting up an argument.
And let's not talk about the CIA and the media, as Carl Bernstein did in Rolling Stone in 1977. Yeah. Anyway,
and so it's just easier to let this guy rot in jail, even though it's been proven that he's innocent.
Yeah, it's crime. So sad. And so the least we can do is at least get him paroled. We don't have to prove his innocence. Just let him go home. His brother is essentially blind and really needs the help. And they still have their family home. The neighbors say they're fine with him coming there. There's really no reason.
And he's 78 years old.
He's not a threat to anybody.
He's not. He never was, unfortunately. Yeah.
Never was.
For him. Yeah.
And then the other thing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. This has been great. And this is the last thing I want to say is just, what we lost when we lost RFK. It just, I don't think the country's ever recovered. I think that was the last hope. And it's just been a disaster ever since.
Well, and people got the message. When you kill 4 top leaders of the left in a 5-year period, because it was JFK in 1963, Malcolm X in 1965, and then MLK in April of 68 and Bobby in June of 68. I mean, you want to talk, conspiracy fatigue. Yeah, by then everybody just wanted to give up and die. It's like, oh my God. Imagine if Reagan and Bush and Colin Powell and Condi, Lisa Rice had all been killed in a 5-year period or something. It's like the right would have been, cowed too. They would have been terrified. Like, let's not.
And this is why you don't see any politicians that resemble John and Bobby Kennedy, or any civil rights leaders that resemble Martin Luther King, because they know there's a line.
And Barack Obama even said something to that effect. Like, I saw what they did to the others. It's like he felt the limits of the box he was in.
They know there's a line, and do not cross that line. If you cross that line, this is what's going to happen. And
exactly,
we need line crossers, damn it.
Yes, we do. We do. We need leaders.
We need people with Bobby's courage, and they're out there. But I don't blame you for not running.
Yeah.
Well,
thank you so much, Lisa. Go ahead, Bill.
Okay.
Just one last thing for me, and Lisa, we kind of talked about this before, but Bobby, he knew what he was walking into, right? And he did it anyway. He had the courage to stand up and do it, and he understood what he was facing, what he was up against, and
no illusions, and all courage and heart. And he did it because he loved us, our country.
Right.
That's just stunning to me. So yeah.
Yep.
All right, R.I.P. Rest in peace, Bobby.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, thank you so much, Lisa. This was great.
Thank
And
you,
we'll
Lisa.
put out that information on Sirhan, and everybody get the letters out. This is really important. This man has been sitting in jail for too long for something he didn't do, and it's time to, the parole board had him recommended for release, so release him. It's far overdue.
Time for the governor to step back and let the system.
Yes,
it's his appointees. It's like, if you don't trust your appointees, why even have a parole board?
Exactly.
You should let them decide.
All right. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. That was amazing, Sean. It was definitely to this point the longest interview we've done.
Right. It definitely was, Bill. And it's just, it's draining, all the information, it's just unbelievable. And the important thing is that, Lisa proves that, Sirhan was an innocent man, and he did not kill Robert Kennedy, and been sitting in prison, and for all these years. And it's time that this man gets paroled. He's 78 years old. It's just unbelievable. And then the other point of the episode is, what we lost when we lost RFK, because I don't think the country's ever recovered. I think that was the last hope, and his assassination changed the country forever.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I don't know how you can, if you listen to that entire interview, how you can listen to that and not, feel at least that Sirhan, could not have done it.
I don't know how you could. It's, there's just no doubt he didn't do it.
Right.
I know there's people that's going to be pushback on the hypnosis stuff, but you got to understand, the CIA was dealing with the MK Ultra operation for more than 20 years. They were doing this mind control experiment on civilians, and this has been going on for over 20 years.
And we'll talk. We're going to do a whole episode when we do Manson, right? We'll talk.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk a lot about that and Manson, and we'll even throw in Whitey Bulger, because he was an MK Ultra experiment as well.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about Manson, but this was important, Bill. This was really good, and Lisa does a great job always, and she really, the raw emotion when she was talking about Bobby Kennedy, that was just unbelievable. Like, it still bothers her to this day.
And I'll tell you what, she was on video when we did this interview, and that was not an act. She was really emotional about this. No. This is her passion. This is her life. Right. She's amazing. She's done an unbelievable work, incredible work, and we're just thrilled. We're thrilled to be able to bring this to you. So, Sean, just another amazing interview with Lisa.
Yeah, it was great, and hopefully, we could get her back to talk about Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
Because it's Martin Luther King Day Monday, and it'd be great to have her back to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Sean, we'll wrap this up, but thank you guys for listening and supporting us, and we'll definitely get more of these types of guests, these people that have all of this great information. We've got a really special guest lined up that we'll talk more about in the future, but just can't believe how much information we're able to get from these folks. It's really fantastic.
It's really great to have these people on, and we got some great guests lined up, Billy.
Yep,
So
absolutely.
Thanks again, Lisa. This has been tremendous, and we got to get her back on.
And the book, her book again, Sean, the title?
A Lie Too Big to Fail.
It's really the definitive book.
It is.
On the RFK assassination. It's
Absolutely.
You haven't read it, go out, get the book, read it. It's amazing. It's really eye-opening. All right, Sean.
All right, buddy.
All right. That's enough out of you.
Good night, everybody.